Marriage would be him becoming a human being so that we might become eternal dance partners in the life of the triune God. That was always God's plan. That's why Paul refers to the marriage relationship between a man and a woman as an analogy of God's relationship to his people. That was always part of God's plan. So this is the center of everything. This is the purpose for all of creation. God would become a human in the person of Jesus Christ. And that's who Jesus is. That's why we call him Emmanuel. The Bible calls him Emmanuel. He is God with us. We sang about that a little bit earlier. He's God with us. I know there's a lot of people today who say, oh, Jesus was a great teacher. He was a really wise man. He was an inspired guru. He was an ascended master. Some would even say he was an archangel. And they think they're giving Jesus compliments in saying that. And Jesus was certainly a wise teacher and smart guy. But you're not complimenting him if that's where you stop. Because he's so much more than that. And to stop short of saying the fullness of who he is really to insult him. Jesus is Emmanuel, God incarnate, God with us. Throughout his ministry, he puts himself in the position of Yahweh. That's why they accused him of blasphemy and why he ultimately got crucified. His disciples call him Lord. Kurios, the Greek translation of Yahweh in the Old Testament. They call him God. Matthew says, or Thomas says to him when Jesus appears, my Lord and my God, John 20:28. They ascribed to him all the divine attributes and all the divine activities. He's the creator of the world, the judge of the world, and the Alpha and the Omega, and on and on and on. And they worship him as God, and they pray to him as God. Jesus is more than just a mere human being, however great a human being he actually was. He's not only a human being, he is fully God, robed in human flesh. The gospel message, and it's the Christmas message, is that God, out of his infinite love, became a human being. He loved us that much. The all-powerful God made himself a little vulnerable baby. The infinite God made himself finite. The creator became the created. That is the gospel message. That is the Christmas message. And it is the center of everything. It's the reason why we exist. It's the purpose for existence. It's the center of history. It's the ultimate revelation of who God is. It's the ultimate revelation of what God thinks about you. It's the ultimate revelation of where God's driving things in the historical process. It's the center of everything. It's absolutely impossible to overemphasize, however many superlatives I might give, it's impossible to overemphasize how important this fact is. And this is what Christmas is about. I always say to people, if this is true, if what I just said is true, it's the by far and away, the most important truth you could ever know. And if it is true, then the last thing that we should be are people who think about this deeply once a year. And that's why I always say every Christmas, if Christmas is something that you think deeply about once a year, then you're really missing the point of Christmas. Because if God became a human being and died on a cross for us that we might eternally live in relationship with him and dance with him throughout eternity, well, then that's got to be a truth that characterizes, that's reflected in our life 24/7 every day of the year. Our whole life should be committed to living under the shadow of and under the impact of the marvelous, stupendous, mind-boggling truth that God became a human person in Jesus Christ. If you get what it's about, it's not something you think about once a year. It's something that every day of our lives is spent living in the light of, under the impact of, and seeking to live out his will on earth as it is in heaven. This is the greatest event of history. It's the meaning of everything. It's the reason why we exist, and must be the center of our lives. So God himself is making his entrance into the world. Son of God just refers to God in human flesh. He's making his entrance into the world here. It's the greatest event imaginable. But wouldn't you think that if this is, God's grand entrance into the world, I don't know, wouldn't you think there'd be a little fanfare or something? Like some bells and whistles, some confetti, some trumpets, some brouhaha, some ooh and ah factor. I mean, wouldn't God write it across the sky and blow the angelic trumpets and make a big display? I'm coming into the world. That's what earthly kings do. I mean, there's always a lot of fanfare when the king comes into town or when the new king is being inaugurated. Despite the economic crisis, they're spending millions of dollars to have a lot of fanfare when Obama is inaugurated. And people are paying thousands and thousands of dollars to sit at the, curb where the parade's going to pass, And there's all the important people are going to be there. All the dignitaries are going to be there. All the generals are going to be there. I mean, all the mucky-mucks in the world are going to be watching this thing. There's a lot of fanfare. That's what you expect. Whenever kings have been inaugurated and whenever they come into town, the military is out there, the parades are out there, the crowds are out there. It's a big event and everybody knows about it. With God, not so much. There's a couple of these shepherds out there that know about it, and there's these weird astrologers from the East who find out about it, but otherwise, the world's oblivious to it. He goes to this little child, a 13-year-old, and he's going to come into the world through this inconspicuous, unknown, insignificant nobody named Mary. You couldn't get a more humble way of entering into this world. I mean, think about it like this. Here's how I imagine it. Have you seen those Google satellite photos? It's just bizarre. Someone showed me this last year where you can look at the whole globe and then you can zero in anywhere you want, and you can really zero in. I was able to find my own house on this thing. It's really scary that information's out there. It's just crazy. Okay, so you can zoom in. Now, picture God's perspective on this. Here's God. This is God's Google. He looks at the whole universe, okay, and it's 14 billion light years across. So he zooms in, and he zooms in past the other billions of galaxies and zooms in on our little galaxy. And then he zooms past the billion other stars that are there and comes to our star, our solar system. And he zooms in past the other 7 planets and he comes to Earth. So he's always looking at Earth. But when he's looking for a portal to come into this world, he zooms in past all the great continents, all the great civilizations, goes right past America and China and Russia, goes right past Egypt and Persia and Greece, goes past all of the major civilizations and focuses on this little plot of land called Palestine. He zooms in past all the major cities in Palestine, Tiberias, Caesarea, Jerusalem, Samaria, Capernaum, Sidon, and comes to this little no-name village called Nazareth. So small, it didn't even show up on most registers in the ancient world. They estimate that there's a couple dozen people probably who live there. He zeroes in on Nazareth. He zooms past all the wealthy people, all the powerful household of Caesar Augustus, Tiberius, Herod, Pilate. Goes past all the religious dignitaries like Caiaphas the high priest. And he comes to this little 13-year-old Jewish virgin. And he says, you. Yeah, you are the one. I choose you. There's nothing extraordinary about her. Even her name, Miriam, Mary, is the single most common name for Jewish girls in the first century. She's as ordinary and as plain as you get. Now, it's true she was betrothed to Joseph, who was of the line of David, and that needed to be the case. The Messiah had to come out of the line of David. But there was thousands of other people who would have fit that qualification as well, and even that wasn't about her. It was about who she was betrothed to. Nothing special. God says, I choose you. Will you be the portal through which I come into this world? I'm going to become a human here. Would you do me the honor of offering up your womb for me to do that in? What God is really saying is, will you be my mother? I'm looking for a mother, and I choose you. It couldn't possibly be more humble, more inconspicuous, more lowly. You couldn't come into the... I think, see, earthly kings need the ooh and ah factor to sort of increase their stature. But God is so above the earthly kings, he doesn't need any... You can't increase his stature. So he says, forget the whole thing. Let's go the opposite direction. And so as big as earthly kings make their entrance, when he comes into the world, he goes as small and as inconspicuous as possible. And see, folks, this tells us so much about God. So much about God. He's a God who always goes towards the humble, uses the humble, prefers the humble and the lowly and the weak, rather than the proud and the strong and the exalted. He's a God who delights in the ordinary, the plain, even the subordinary. The Bible says he's a God who uses the foolish things of this world to confound the wise and the weak things of this world to confound the strong. I think he does it, that's on purpose. See, if he uses the people who are the most competent, well, then there'll be some temptation to give the credit for what gets done to the competent people. But when God uses ordinary losers like you and me and Mary, well, then it's very clear that it's God who's doing it. It's a really smart design when you think about it. He uses the foolish things to confound the wise. So the wise people are scratching their head, saying, how could that possibly happen? It's good news,